Hi, welcome to the Healthy Perspective. Thanks for joining me today. Our topic today is we're going to get into the whole concept of cannabis, i.e., marijuana, hemp, CBD, THC, that sort of thing. Now, some of you, if you're people who have been following this for a long time, this may not be this is not an advanced class. This is a class for people who are relatively new to this whole subject and are kind of maybe confused because you have this situation where, a lot of people, conservative people, religious people, people who are like me who grew up not abusing anything, alcohol, drugs, anything, would think, here's this really, really bad, plant, and yet people are using a form of it medicinally. And so that must be dangerous. That must be wrong. And what prompted this is I working on a book talking about this whole subject, including CBD and so forth. And I went last week and gave a lecture for a company I lecture for quite a bit. And the guy there said that some of the people, when they introduced they were going to come out with CBD, some of the more people in the audience were really upset that this company would do that, because a lot of the people in this company are very conservative people, and they see this as a very bad thing. And so what I want to do is try to clear up the confusion on the whole issue of cannabis, hemp, marijuana, and so forth, and try to put it in a good perspective. And I'm going to introduce this, and I realize that I'm going to have to do this in several webinars. So probably I'm going to wind up devoting the entire rest of the year, all the Healthy Perspective webinars in November and into December, on really talking about this subject, because there's a lot to cover. And talking about it is going to help me organize my thoughts for writing the book, because I have a really, really unique perspective on this, having been in this industry for about 40 years full time, and having seen numerous fads come and go, where people come out with the latest plant that's the miracle wonder thing that's going to save everybody, and it's the only thing you need. It was aloe vera, and then it was noni, and then it was mangosteen and antioxidant drinks, and then it was essential oils, and on and on and on. I've been through it all. And now it's going to be CBD. And so it's really important to put this in a perspective and really see it in a good way, because I really hate when our industry, the natural products industry, comes out and starts selling things on hyping it way beyond what it is, not really helping people understand real good facts, because I believe very firmly in education. Now, there's issues because companies that manufacture hemp or CBD products cannot make medical claims. And those that are, the FDA is going to come down and stomp on them like crazy, because this is a really gray area of the law. And so we've got to be very careful how we utilize this and how we promote it. And so in order to do that, we have to understand what it is we're talking about and be educated about it. So let's get on with that. I've prepared a few slides to help with this. So let's start off with the fact that cannabis, originally they thought there were maybe 3 different species of cannabis, but now botanists say there's really only one species with numerous varieties or cultivars. And the 2 main cultivars are cannabis sativa, variety sativa, that used to be considered cannabis sativa, and that is commonly called hemp. And so the genetics of that particular variety cause this plant to produce a lot of fiber, but not very many of the cannabinoids, which we're going to be talking about today. And this plant has been grown commercially for its fiber and its seeds for thousands of years. So we're going to talk about that. Hemp is one of the most useful plants on the planet. And the fact that it was just made legal to grow it in the United States is a big breakthrough. And we want to keep it that way, because this, as I'm going to explain, this is a very, very valuable plant. Now, cannabis sativa variety indica, which is commonly called marijuana, pot, weed, reefer, grass, dope, on and on. Even it's called herb. I mean, I've put up herb videos on YouTube and had people say, "Oh, I thought I was going to get to see a video on marijuana." You know, sorry, marijuana is just one plant, one herb. There are lots and lots of very, very valuable herbs in the plant kingdom. The genetics of that one make it lower in fiber, higher in cannabinoids, particularly THC. And that one's the one that's typically grown for medicinal and or recreational use. Now, that's really an oversimplification because there are numerous hybrids or cultivars of these two varieties that exist with varying degrees of cannabinoids and ratios of them. And there's just this whole flurry of activity growing on in breeding different strains of cannabis for different purposes. So this is a plant that belongs to a family that's named for cannabis, Cannabaceae family, that has only 11 genera, with its closest relative being hops, which we know is a very useful medicinal plant. And it's a very unusual plant because it has plants that have basically female flowers and other plants that have male flowers, and some plants have a combination of male and female flowers. So that's very unusual in the plant kingdom. Most flowers are what are called perfect flowers. They have both the male and female reproductive plant things in the same flowers. Some things like squashes and melons have male and female flowers on the same plant, but to actually have male plants and female plants is kind of unusual in the plant kingdom. And this plant, as I mentioned, has been used forever, especially the hemp, because it's very valuable fiber for paper, clothing, rope, and sails. I can still remember hemp rope from my childhood. It is this braided rope that's kind of a brownish color, and it was the way rope was traditionally made before synthetics came along and they started making rope primarily out of petroleum byproducts. The seeds, which are pictured here, and this is from a CD I got when I was in China in 2006 of medicinal plants, and one of them is cannabis, and this is a picture of the seeds, which are used in TCM medicine as a bulking laxative, much like people sometimes use flaxseed to help soften and lubricate the stool in Western medicine. Now, canvas originally was made from mostly either flax or hemp, but the word canvas probably is a derivative of cannabis, which the Greek word cannabis means two reeds or two sexes, meaning a plant that has the two different sexes of plants. And so canvas was primarily made from hemp fiber. And in fact, hemp fiber was the #1 source of fiber for paper until 1883. And so Bibles were printed on hemp paper, or maps were printed on hemp paper, books, newspapers, and even paper money was made from hemp paper. And in fact, when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, it was originally, the draft was written on hemp paper, and then to preserve it for future generations, it was transferred to parchment. And so what they used to do in colonial times, I hope everybody's hearing. Looks like a couple people had trouble logging in. I was just checking the messages. Anyway, they used to gather up clothing because they made clothing from hemp fiber. Hemp fiber was more commonly used than cotton fiber for making clothing because it was cheaper, more plentiful, easier to process, and so forth. And so when people, had used clothes and rags and things like that they weren't using, they used to gather that up and they used to recycle it into paper. Hence, have you ever heard, referring to rag paper or referring to a newspaper as a rag? It comes from the use of hemp fiber that was basically recycled from clothes. And one of the things that I think is really amazing, and this is where there's a real ecological value in hemp, is that a 1916 USDA bulletin reported that 1 acre of hemp would produce as much paper as 4.1 acres of trees over a 20-year period. Now, of course, the trees take 20 years to grow. And so every year you're getting a crop of hemp. So over the 20-year period, you're basically getting 4 times more paper out of the same amount of land in using hemp. And not only that, but hemp fiber is sturdier than wood pulp fiber, and therefore the paper is more easily recyclable. It can be made with less chemicals, and it also, is recycled with less chemicals. So we could literally save forests by growing hemp, a very, very valuable plant. Now, what got me interested in this, and this was way back in the late 1980s, is I ran into a copy of this book called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And I read it, and I was fascinated. Of course, being someone who's interested in medicinal plants, this really, really intrigued me. And basically, what I learned from this book is that, the 3 main things that were there are 3 main avenues in which hemp/marijuana was used. Okay, so most people knew of the medicine, the medicinal cannabis as cannabis, and it was used as a medicine. It was used in the American Pharmacopoeia. It had been used as a medicine since very ancient times, but the medicine was known as cannabis. The fiber plant was known as hemp. Okay, and the typical use of the plant for as a drug was known as hashish. So most Americans associated the use of hashish with the abuse of the plant as a drug, and they were not familiar, with the idea of the term marijuana. So what the story goes is that William Randolph Hearst, who and I don't know if any of you have ever been out to California, San Simeon, the Hearst Mansion. This guy was, a huge multi-millionaire who owned basically all of the big newspapers in the United States. Became a multi-millionaire and was very heavily invested in making wood pulp paper. In other words, he had a lot of investments in the wood pulp paper industry and also in the petroleum industry. And hemp represented a threat to his economic interests because hemp paper was better than wood pulp paper. And so what he wanted to do was get rid of hemp so that he could, profit better from his investments in wood pulp paper. And also, hemp oil makes a very fine lubricant. It's also a very nutritious oil as well. And so he also wanted to protect his petroleum investments against the use of hemp oil, which, like flaxseed oil, is a very good plant oil. And so what he did is he started a smear campaign in his newspapers against the plant marijuana. And that was an obscure Mexican term for cannabis, marijuana. Nobody knew about marijuana. But what he did, and you talk about fake news, okay, fake news has been around for a long time. What William Randolph Hearst did was he planted stories in his newspapers whenever there was a crime or a violent criminal, that this guy had been found, that he was a reefer addict, that he was found with marijuana in his possession, that marijuana turned people into crazed, homicidal, maniac killers, and got the country in an uproar over this plant called marijuana, and then basically succeeded with enough public outcry to get Congress to decide to ban it. And at the last minute, the AMA found out that the plant they were about to ban was cannabis. And they sent a representative in and said, this is one of the safest painkillers we have. It's not addictive. It's a very safe pain medication. Why are you outlawing it? And not only that, the other thing was the birdseed industry came in, because if you mix hemp seeds in birdseed, the birds will eat all the hemp seeds first because they're extremely nutritious. And so they were really concerned about losing one of their favorite birdseed plants. Anyway, the plant was outlawed first in 1937. But then what happened is then World War II broke out, and suddenly they needed rope, they needed canvas, they needed clothes for the soldiers. So what they did is they put out a film and encouraged farmers to grow hemp again in order to help them win the World War II. So then after World War II, they went back to outlawing it. So there's a real, one of the reasons why people are so scared of marijuana is because of the propaganda that has been put out against this plant. Now it is true, and I'm going to talk about there are issues with people using something like marijuana recreationally, because there are some problems that can occur, but there are problems very similar to what happens with people drinking alcohol. I mean, alcohol, the person who has an occasional beer or a glass of wine isn't, a danger to anybody, but people who drink and drive, that's a big problem. People who drink excessively can develop, liver disease from it. So there are some, negative things to alcohol, but marijuana is basically on par with alcohol, but it was scheduled as a class 1 narcotic. Now, what that means is that I'm just going to stop the presentation here for a second so I can just look at this. So what a class 1 narcotic is it's a drug that is potentially deadly and highly addictive and has no medicinal value. And so there have been lawsuits brought against the federal government basically saying, okay, marijuana, number one, has legitimate medicinal uses. And two, nobody's ever died from using it, whereas people have died from alcohol poisoning and people have died, from cigarettes. There's no evidence that people have died from cannabis, although I suppose that smoking cannabis every day might eventually do damage to your lungs, just like smoking tobacco does, because it's not just the nicotine in tobacco that's a problem. It's the tar and the other chemicals that are released in the smoke that you're inhaling into your lungs. So I don't know why that wouldn't be similar. If you're smoking marijuana, you're getting tar and other chemicals from the smoke into your lungs too. But nonetheless, what I'm saying is that there was no legitimate legal reason to classify it that way. Yet in these lawsuits, the federal government said, well, yeah, you're right, but we can do what we want. What's interesting is if you look at prohibition with alcohol, the government at that time recognized that the federal government had no right to ban substances. It had no legal authority to do so. It took a constitutional amendment to create a ban on alcohol. And then, of course, that turned into a disaster because otherwise good people, who wanted some wine or some beer or whatever, wound up going underground to get it, and therefore you develop this huge kind of mafia kind of thing that created all these problems, and eventually they wound up repealing that. But then when they decided into these narcotic laws, the government had then assumed that they could do it anyway, that they didn't need constitutional authority to do this. But see, it's really the states that are supposed to be regulating this kind of thing. It's a states' rights issue, as are a lot of other things. Now, I've started posting some articles on my website, and I'm also writing a book called Let Freedom Ring about liberty and morality and America. And I'm going to address some of this stuff in that book. And so if you want to read that, you can follow those articles on my website, along with the stuff I'll be posting about cannabis as I'm writing my cannabis book, because there's an interchange with this. But I don't think that, like I said, to me, I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke pot. I don't do any of this stuff because I don't need some substance to make me feel good. I know how to make myself feel good by living a good life and eating healthy and doing things that are good for me. So to me, a lot of what happens is people will, do these things to kind of run away from themselves. But I wouldn't I don't see any reason why I have to outlaw or prevent people from being able to do that. Now, being able to drink and drive or smoke pot and drive, those are issues. Being able, operating heavy machinery or planes, there's a whole bunch of issues around those kind of things. But marijuana is actually useful medicine. Now, the fact that a plant is useful medicine doesn't mean it can't be abused. Now, I'm going to give an example of Chinese ephedra. Chinese ephedra has been used safely in China for thousands of years as a remedy for asthma and respiratory congestion and help the acute stages of a cold. And it was mixed with other herbs, and it was used in a kind of a low dose. What's interesting is the active ingredient in ephedra, or what is considered one of the primary active ingredients, because plants have multiple active ingredients, as we'll talk about in a minute. But one of the primary active ingredients was ephedrine, which is an alkaloid that mimics epinephrine in the body. So in other words, plants can mimic the body's own chemical messengers. And so ephedra mimics ephedrine, which is your, also known as adrenaline, which is your primary sympathetic nervous system thing. And all of the drugs, like Ritalin and all of these, a lot of these uppers are actually epinephrine mimics. And epinephrine is actually an over-the-counter cold medications. But because epinephrine stimulates metabolism, people got this great idea to sell ephedra mixed with willow bark and other things as a weight loss aid, and people took it, and some of them it elevated their blood pressure and heart rate too high, and they wound up dying. There were about 8 deaths from this, and that gave an excuse for the FDA to come down and boom, we can't have ephedra anymore. And this has happened with a number of very, very useful therapeutic herbs that people, abused and didn't use right, and it brought government regulation down on it. And this is what I'm most scared about with the CBD craze. I'm really, really scared that if we don't go out and try to educate people realistically about what this really is, that we're going to wind up with government regulation clamping down on this, and we're not going to be able to get the benefits from what I think is a very legitimate and very safe medicinal plant. And so with that, let me go back to my slides and kind of continue with a little bit about understanding hemp. So it was just this last year that the federal government signed into law a farm bill that permitted the cultivation of hemp in the United States under certain legal restrictions. And the biggest of those is that the THC content, which we'll talk about in a minute, has to be less than 0.3%. In other words, 0.3%. And that opens up the fact that hemp can now be used for all these wonderful things that you can do. The highly nutritious omega-3 rich oil, the protein it contains, the foods it can be used in, the fiber that can be used to create possibly building materials, biomass for fuel that can save trees, maybe insulation, paper, numerous uses for this, as well as some potential medicinal uses for the hemp with its low THC levels. And this is based on the fact that in trying to study how marijuana works, researchers found an entirely new system in the body that they knew nothing about, called the endocannabinoid system. So they named the compounds, like the THC, cannabinoids, because they come from cannabis. And so what they did is when they found this system, they named it the endo, meaning interior or inside the body, cannabinoid system. And they actually have identified 5 cannabinoids that the human body makes, the 2 primary ones listed here. And then they've also identified over 100 phytocannabinoids. Now, remember I talked about how ephedra contains ephedrine, which is a mimic of epinephrine. Well, you also have things like opiates that are found in plants, like poppy. Opium poppy produces morphine and other alkaloids that attach to what they call opioid receptors but the actual internal opioids are called endorphins, and they make you feel good. And so the internal cannabinoid system is a signaling system within the body that is dispersed pretty much through most of the body. And so you have your endocannabinoids, the ones that we're making ourselves, and then you have the phytocannabinoids, the ones that are found in plants that can also attach to or modulate the receptors. And of course, one of the biggest and most well-known, and the ones that's being promoted a lot, is CBD. And of course, the THC, which is the one that is psychoactive and gives people the high of smoking marijuana, is another phytocannabinoid. And then there's a whole bunch more. And the research is really, really just beginning to understand all about these different phytocannabinoids, what they can do, what they can't do, and so forth. The receptors for the cannabinoids, both the phytocannabinoids and endocannabinoids, are found throughout the body, but the number one kind is called the CB1 receptors, and they're primarily found in the brain and the central nervous system tissue, but also in glands and in the liver, which the glandular system, I think, is kind of an extension of the nervous system. Both of them are signaling systems that are sending chemical messages to the body in order to try to maintain homeostasis and keep the body in balance. So you also have CB2 receptors, which are primarily found in the skin, lymphatics, and immune system. These ones appear to modulate immunity. So the CB1 receptors are modulating the body's communication systems. The CB2 are modulating the immune responses. And then you have both kinds of receptors in the eyes, the heart, the bone, and in the gastrointestinal tract. And again, the research coming out on this is all, fairly new. But the CB1 receptors are involved in pain signaling. They have an effect on memory and learning. They can either increase or decrease anxiety, and that's important to know, okay? They can affect motor control. They can increase appetite. In fact, there is evidence that one thing that may be happening in obesity is there is an over signaling of CB1 receptors. There's too many CB1 receptors, which increases appetite and makes people eat more. And they actually developed a drug that blocked the CB1 receptors involved in appetite, but it had way too many side effects, and there's reasons why that would be the case. But, people who smoke pot are well known to get the munchies and want to eat, especially eat carbohydrates. And that's due to THC binding to the CB1 receptors. CB1 receptors can reduce nausea and vomiting, and specifically THC can create a sense of euphoria or getting high, which is binding to primarily the CB1 receptors. CB2 receptors help maintain the balance of the immune system. So that means they help the immune system fight disease and cancer and stuff, but they also help modulate autoimmune disorders. So they help keep the immune system functioning in a balanced kind of way. They decrease peripheral nerve pain. So the CB1 receptors, are basically modulating pain in the central nervous system. The CB2 receptors, out at the site of where there's injury and damage. They decrease the breakdown of bone and encourage the growth of new bone. They protect the heart from injury, and they also have a hepatoprotective effect. And both CB1 and CB2 receptors reduce gut inflammation, inhibit digestive secretions, and reduce gut irritation. Now, what is exciting about the discovery of the endocannabinoid system is this. It appears to be a system that's primary goal is to help maintain homeostasis in the body. Homeostasis is the natural dynamic balance that creates health. There is an environment, a correct environment that needs to be maintained at the cellular level in order to keep you healthy. So you have this, need to keep balanced levels of sugar, balanced levels of oxygen, balanced levels of nutrients, proper waste removal, a balanced temperature. You can't get too hot or too cold. Everything in the body has to be kept in balance in order to be able to keep cells healthy. Now, so when there are environmental stresses, when it's cold outside, like it suddenly got really cold here where I live in southern Utah, okay, the body has to make adaptation. We put on warmer clothes, but the body also adjusts its internal environment to manage the cold, whereas in the summer when it's over 100 degrees out here, the body's trying to cope with the opposite problem, trying to cool itself down, maintaining heat. So the body's trying to maintain this dynamic balance. So the endocannabinoid system is involved in all the signaling that helps to maintain that balance, to keep the body in balance. And so when you're eating poorly, when you're under constant stress, or when you've got chronic inflammation leading chronic pain, it knocks the endocannabinoid system out of balance, and the body has a hard time getting back to balance. And so what the research is suggesting as a just general overall idea, so we understand the basic idea of what phytocannabinoids are doing, is they're helping when the body has gotten knocked so far out of balance that it is having a hard time finding its way back. Phytocannabinoids appear to be able to tweak the system to kind of start getting it back in balance again. Okay, and I think that's the best way to understand them and what they're doing. So, here's a picture of the girl riding the unicycle, right? And so to stay on a unicycle, you're moving forward, and you start to lean one way, you have to counterbalance the other way, you have to kind of keep moving back and forth to get this balance. And that's what the endocannabinoid system is doing, is trying to keep your body from going too far in one direction, too far in another direction, so it stays in balance. And when it becomes too imbalanced, when it becomes imbalanced, you start getting sick, and then as you heal, it goes back into balance. And so the balance is ongoing. It's dynamic. I mean, sometimes your life is going really smoothly. Sometimes you're under a lot of stress. Sometimes, you're financially well off. Sometimes you're in financial difficulty, blah, 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 on and on and on. You're constantly having to adapt and cope and adjust to the changing conditions. Sometimes you get exposed to toxins. Sometimes you don't eat healthy, blah, blah, blah. And the body's always trying to nudge you back into balance and encourage you to do things that get back into balance. Now, this is one of the things that I really want to stress, and what I'm really going to be stressing in the book to try to get people to understand, because the endocannabinoid system, I don't think can be understood unless you really understand holistic health. Because what we have inside this body is basically a community. We think of ourselves as one living thing, but the body is composed of 30 to 40 trillion living things called cells. And each one of those cells can live and it can die and can reproduce. And so what happens in a multicellular organism like the body is the cells specialize. As the body grows and develops, cells differentiate themselves from other cells. They'll start off the same, but then they differentiate. They start specializing, and they become more and more specialized. Think of there's maybe 100 or more different types of cells in your eye alone, maybe 200 or 300. I don't know. I've never bothered to figure out. But the cells that construct your lens, your retina, your blah 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 blah, on and on. There's all these different cells that are constructing these different structures, and they're all highly specialized. They have highly specialized tasks. So all through your body, you have all these cells with highly specialized tasks, and all of those cells are contributing to the body functioning as a whole. And if the body is functioning as a whole well, then all of the cells are going to get what they need. They're all, because homeostasis will be maintained. Now, the breakdown of health starts when certain aspects of the body aren't performing well. When something tips out of balance, and maybe your liver isn't working well, your kidneys aren't working well, your GI tract is upset, you're under a lot of stress, and so you're nervous system and endocrine system is out of balance and so forth. And so in order to find its way back to balance, cells have to talk to each other. They have to be able to communicate. And so just like we have skin and we have a sense of touch and we can tell when it's getting cold or when it's getting hot, and we can hear things that alert us to danger or see things that tell us there's food or water that we can get, cells have to have sensory mechanisms to say what's going on in the environment as a whole, so that the cells that know how to create the balance, how to rebalance the system, get the message that the system is out of balance, and thereby respond correctly to the body's environmental signals to bring the signal back to balance. So what the signaling systems of the body are all on the surface of the cell. The surface of the cell contains basically chemical sensing agents that sense the environment of the body and then adjust the body accordingly in order to be able to get the things to go back into balance. And so here you have a couple of depictions. This is actually the one on the left is depicting the kinds of receptors that would be for opioids, but also for endocannabinoids. And so what happens is that there's a chemical floating out here in the environment outside the cell, and it has a chemical affinity for the shape of a receptor on the cell. And when it attaches to that receptor site, that receptor goes through the cell membrane and it alters the structure of the other side, which creates an adjustment in the internal cellular processes that make the cell upregulate certain chemicals to be released in the environment or downregulate certain chemicals to be released in the environment and so forth. And that's what the sensory systems on the cell do. Now, this is a depiction on the other side, the right, of the glucose thing. So insulin attaches to a receptor and it changes something down here that goes over here and opens up a little cellular gate that lets glucose into the cell. So insulin tells the cell, okay, well, there's, it's time to open up and receive the glucose. And the whole sensory system, in the cells and the signaling systems are done that way. So hormones work by attaching to receptor sites and altering enzymes that basically cause changes inside the cellular response. Neurotransmitters are released across the gaps of synapses to talk to the neighboring nerve cells, and they attach to receptors on the neighboring nerve cells and basically make things happen. And then you have your prostaglandins and mucosinoids that are like neighborhood gossip. Think of them as neighborhood gossips. Hormones and neurotransmitters are like the big systems that keep the body in balance. The local systems that keep it in balance are your prostaglandins and mucosinoids. So what we're talking about is that there's a balance, and I've used this a lot. It's the idea of the yin and the yang, the from Oriental medicine. But like I've done this, did a class talking about when your body tips too far to the balance of parasympathetic nervous system response or tips too far to the sympathetic nervous system response, and how you rebalance it. But that's true with all kinds of things, the HPA axis in stress modulation and so forth. There's all these axes in the body. But someone pointed out, and I thought this was a really interesting idea I never read as I was studying this, that these balancing systems are all interconnected with each other. So what happens is, your body's a little out of balance and you get a drug and you dump that drug in to make a change in one part of the signaling system of the body. Well, that signaling system of that one signaling system is connected into multiple other signaling systems. And so it throws the entire balance of everything out. So medicine assumes that that the signals are what are the problem, if I'm making sense. In other words, the problem originates because the chemical messengers are out of balance. You're depressed because you have low serotonin, or you have asthma because you don't have enough epinephrine, or on and on, or you have high blood pressure because you have too much epinephrine, so we have to block that. But But all of this and the whole study of what medicine is doing with the endocannabinoid system is looking for drugs. They're looking for ways that they can target specific receptors and make specific changes and blah, blah, blah. But that's not holistic medicine, okay? The holistic medicine is all about trying to recreate and keep the system tweaked in dynamic balance. And so to do that, you have to rely not on something like a whole plant that has a gentler action and doesn't just like slam the system with a hammer, but more kind of tweaks the system. And I think that's why medical hemp is really interesting. So I want to just explain a little bit about the CB1 receptors. Like I said, we're going to have to get into this more in later things. But so you have a presynaptic cell that basically is releasing neurotransmitters into the synapse to stimulate the next nerve cell to fire. All right, that's your signaling. That's part of your signaling system. What the endocannabinoid system is a feedback system. So this cell says, I'm getting overstimulated. I'm getting too many messages. I'm getting too much message for pain or anxiety or whatever. And so the endocannabinoids are released from the receiving end of the neurotransmitter thing, and they go back up and hit the cannabinoid receptors and downregulate the release of the neurotransmitters. So it's a feedback loop, right? It's a feedback loop that says, wait a minute, there's too much pain signaling going on. And that kind of thing happens in chronic pain. What can happen, and I'm going to do a webinar on holistic healing in December, which you can sign up. It's free. It's a 2-part webinar introducing me talking about this a little bit more in the future. But everything in the body has feedback in order to try to maintain homeostasis. And so when you're stuck in chronic pain, there's kind of this tension and mental attitude that sets in that your pain thing keeps firing and firing and firing and doesn't stop, or that inflammation keeps going and going and going and doesn't stop, that basically instead of the inflammation process reversing as the injury heals and everything going back to normal, it gets stuck, turned on. And the endocannabinoid system is the one that downregulates those responses to tweak the system back to normal. You get it? In other words, it adjusts the internal signaling when it's overcompensating for something to basically help bring it back into balance. That is incredible. That's an incredible discovery. And what I want to understand is that the phytocannabinoids, and there's at least 113 that have been identified in the cannabis plant, and only a few of them, like CBD, have been well researched. These phytocannabinoids can go in and they can tweak the system back to homeostasis. That's the beauty of it. So our medicinal plants that have been around for a long time have the ability to tweak the signaling systems of the body so it helps nudge the thing back to homeostasis. That's the whole idea of traditional medicine. I mean, I was teaching about traditional Chinese medicine this year and rewriting my Chinese healing book. The whole goal of healing is not to treat symptoms. It's to rebalance the body and rediscover homeostasis. And cannabis can help do that. But so can other plants. We're discovering their phytocannabinoids in many other plants that we've been using for a long time, such as echinacea, kava, chocolate, green tea, truffles. And we're going to probably discover more phytocannabinoids, that's plant-based cannabinoids, as time goes on. So for example, echinacea contains cannabomimetics, which means there are substances that mimic your internal cannabinoids in the form of alkaloids. About 25 have been identified, and some have affinities for the CB2 receptors. So what are the CB2 receptors? There are the receptors that modulate the immune responses. And so there are other compounds that actively fight infection, inhibit the bacterial breakdown of connective tissue so infection can't spread. So one of the beauties of herbs is to have a broad range of actions. And this is giving us an understanding of some of the actions that we haven't understood about plants. We've known that echinacea helps inhibit the spread of infection, helps the body fight infections, especially chronic infections that are very difficult to treat. Well, here's an interesting thing, that it actually interacts with the phytocannabinoid system to basically help that. Another one is that kava-lactones and kava appear to also interact directly with the CB1 receptor, thereby reducing anxiety, increasing mental alertness, easing muscle tension, and so forth. So in other words, here's a whole new discovery about another very useful medicinal plant that I really love for anxiety and muscle tension and so forth, and finding out that it actually interacts with the endocannabinoid system to do what it does. And here's another interesting one. Chocolate, I already knew it contains a lot of feel-good chemicals, that, including stuff that interacts with the opioid system, the endorphin system, acts with the oxytocin, which is your feel-good hormone. Well, guess what? It also contains anandamide. I've got to get that thing put in my thing, which is known as the bliss molecule. It's your primary endocannabinoid that gives you a feeling of good. Now, someone just said this, and I just want to make this really, this is why I think this is really important. She said when she tried kava to help me sleep, it made her stay awake. That's because your body can always go out of balance in two different directions. And those going out of balance in either direction could cause anxiety or insomnia. Therefore, what happens is sometimes when we tweak the system one way and it doesn't work, it means we need to tweak the system the other way. So, and that's the importance of understanding balance, because you go out and you start promoting CBD, it does this, it does that, it does that. Well, it isn't always going to do that. It's going to do that if the system is out of balance in a certain way, but it's not going to work for everybody. So anyway, black truffles also contain that particular compound. So I just want to close here with just introducing this, because I'm going to continue this in the next webinar, because we're going to run out of time today. But THC is the one that produces the psychoactive effects. And THC actually is potentially valuable medicinally, but it does have, but it's illegal in most states, and it's legal in some, but it's still illegal at the federal level. CBD, which is the one that the cannabinoid that's becoming increasingly popular and everybody's raving about and so forth, is non-psychoactive. And it actually doesn't directly attach to cannabinoid receptors. It modulates the receptors to make them more sensitive to your endocannabinoids. So in other words, when the system is kind of out of balance and it's not responding well, it tweaks the system to help your system respond better to your endocannabinoids. Whoops, I uploaded the wrong version of this because I had some other slides that I meant to upload about some of the effects of the THC. I also had some stuff about some of my upcoming classes, which I grabbed the wrong presentation by accident. Anyway, but while I am getting into answer your question, what I'm going to do is in the next presentation of this, I'm going to talk about THC, CBC, and some of the other cannabinoids from cannabis, and talk about some of the research about what they do and what they can be, what uses you can have on them. But I want to just, for this particular thing, I wanted people to understand that there are many different strains of cannabis. And the ones that are currently legal everywhere, the hemp varieties, are the ones that are where you're getting CBD and other phytocannabinoids, but a very low level of THC. And those are very safe. They're not going to produce any psychoactive effect whatsoever. They're tweaking the endocannabinoid system. and their primary, probably best uses are for chronic pain disorders, autoimmune disorders, or cancer, where the immune system is not functioning properly or signaling correctly, chronic inflammation, which is usually associated with chronic pain, and also possibly anxiety or depression, although they may not work depending on how your nervous system is out of balance. And so I am going to mention some stuff about the THC for states where you can legally get medical marijuana. But I'm also going to focus on the whole idea of the whole phytocannabinoids, because I think the best approach is to use a whole hemp extract that has multiple phytocannabinoids, because that is going to help tweak the system better than having high concentrations of a particular phytocannabinoid. Because what happens is, and this is the thing that you have to be aware of in how even plants work, as well as the problem that you have with drugs. Okay? If I take, for example, caffeine, caffeine works by blocking a neurotransmitter in your brain called adenosine that tells you need to sleep. So look, your body is trying to communicate that you need sleep, right? That you're tired. So you take caffeine and it blocks the message you're tired. That's all it's doing. So now you're tired, but you're pushing yourself farther. And when you push yourself farther when you're tired, that ups the stress hormones in your body. That ups cortisol in your body. Your body in order to compensate, your body upregulates cortisol, upregulates epinephrine, which increases your anxiety, increases your blood pressure, increases your heart rate, increases your stress level, and so forth. Now, what the body does is the body says, okay, if you're going to do this, then I'm going to build more adenosine receptors to bypass the caffeine to get the message through that you're tired. And so then, in order to get the same effect, people will drink more. They'll drink more and more caffeine, driving their system farther and farther out of balance. Now remember that coffee is an herb. Okay, it's an herb. It's a medicinal plant, and the occasional use of little coffee to maybe up your mental alertness or help you wake up in the morning or something is okay. And the person who's just said that kava kept them awake says coffee helps them sleep. Now, that's exactly what I'm talking about, because caffeine is tweaking your nervous system in the opposite direction that kava is. And that has to do with what I was referring to earlier about the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system dominance. So what our goal is to tweak the system back to normality. So what I want to teach about, what I want to write about in the book, and what I want to teach about in some classes and webinars, is using cannabis along with what we know about holistic health to restore the body to balance. Because cannabis is not going to be a miracle thing for pain, because if you've read my article about my introduction to using cannabis, when my friend made the tincture, the E-glycerite, and I would use it for severe pain, I always went and looked at what's the underlying reason behind the pain. In fact, I need to go back and modify, because I believe that when he had the cannabis for the earache, I still put the garlic clove in my ear, which is what I typically do to try to help heal an inner ear infection. So I still treated the underlying problem, okay? Or when I gave E to a couple of people in really, really serious pain, I think both of them had really bad back pain. I also worked on their back and did some other things to help relax their back muscles, had to get some care to kind of rebalance things. You cannot ignore the signals the body is taking and think that somehow by blocking the signal you're tired, or blocking the signal you're in pain, or blocking or whatever, that's going to solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. The body, what happens in people who are high marijuana users, especially high levels of THC, is the body starts readjusting the entire endocannabinoid system, and you throw the whole system out of whack. And then they need higher and higher doses to try to get the euphoria. And this is something that people don't really seem to talk about or understand. They all think that this is the magic button. I can now take this. I can go live how I want, eat how I want, think how I want, do all this crazy crap. And this is going to keep me doing all the wrong things, and it's going to be fine. It won't. It's not going to do that. So you have to incorporate CBD intelligently into a holistic program that helps restore balance to the body. That's the message I want to give to everybody. That's what I want to teach everybody. That's what I want to communicate with everybody. It is not just that problem. And someone also mentioned this other thing. It is really, really important that if you're going to buy any CBD products, that you have to get companies that are highly credible, know how to monitor what's going on. And the legal climate is still very shifty in everything. Because there's a disagreement between state and federal laws. There's arguments between state and federal government. There's a lot of issues going on with this. So you can't just run out and buy any CBD product and expect it to work, especially since different cultivars or varieties of cannabis contain differing amounts of phytocannabinoids. So one species that might be beneficial because it has the right mix of certain phytocannabinoids that might make it helpful for cancer doesn't mean that another cultivar of cannabis is going to do that. It won't. So again, we have to be intelligent and look at this, realistically, and not run based on the hype and everything with this. So I want to mention here again my Chinese herb course, if any that's coming up on TCM, which I think is a really good course on teaching balance and so forth, which is important. I meant to put up an offer about the the wellness course in December that'll be free, but I'll put that at the bottom of the recording of this video on YouTube. What I would encourage everybody to do is since you signed up for this, next time I'm going to get more specifically into the phytocannabinoids and how they work and about the body signaling things. I just wanted to clear up that I'm 100% in favor of medical marijuana. I am not a big fan of smoking pot recreationally, and I'm going to explain a little bit more why I'm not in favor of that in my book and in the upcoming webinar, because a lot of what people are trying to do is escape their problems. I mean, it's just like caffeine is a way of trying to push yourself when you're tired, and what you really need is sleep. And when we use plants in that way, we're abusing them. We're not using them in an intelligent manner. Now, if I'm driving home late at night and I'm tired and I need to keep myself alert and I want to go get some caffeine to keep myself mentally awake so I don't get into an accident, that's a perfectly legitimate use. And if I like that little bit of coffee every morning, my body's going to adapt to it and I'm going to be okay. But when you push and push and push something, you're missing the whole point of your internal signaling systems. Your internal signaling systems are trying to nudge you to adopt behaviors that are going to keep your body in balance. And if you're ignoring that and trying to use either pharmaceutical drugs or highly medicinal plants to bypass the body's signaling systems and say, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to these messages, I'm just going to modify the messages, and not actually fix the underlying problem, you're going to be disappointed in the long run. You're not going to get the effects that you work with. So when I do my book and I'm talking about, ailments where CBD might be helpful, one of the things I'm going to stress is the holistic protocols that need to go with that, the things that the other medicinal plants that could be helpful. Because I have long believed that the best way to use cannabis is like we do with herbal formulas, where you combine herbs synergistically to work on the underlying problem with maybe something that helps to temporarily relieve the symptoms. That is an intelligent use of this. So I've run out of time for today. I'm very sorry that I didn't have a chance on this webinar. Normally I like to try to answer questions, but I had so much material I wanted to cover to introduce this topic. I want to, like I said, continue this. I hope that you found the information valuable to at least get started in understanding this and understand that it is a very good herb. It's no more dangerous than many other medicinal plants that we've used, but we need to learn how to use it intelligently and as part of holistic protocols that actually are addressing the underlying causes of disease. And then if we're doing it that way, we can use CBD when we've got this really tough problem that's not responding to the therapy very well, to tweak the endocannabinoid system to get the system to swing back into homeostasis. That's the intelligent use of this. And so I hope that has made a lot of sense to everybody, because that's the most important thing I want to get out about this, because I've been waiting for a long time, hoping someday that I'd be able to actually use cannabis as part of my herbal medicine thing without worrying about being arrested. And now that there's a window opening to do it, I want to be able to use it intelligently so we don't lose it. Okay? I want to have this plant around because I think it's a very useful medicinal plant, and I don't want to lose it like we lost ephedra, or we lost chaparral, or we lost a whole bunch of other medicinal plants because of stupid meddling by the government because a few people abused the plant. That is something I really don't want to see happen here. So with that, I'll say goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing this. You can watch this video on YouTube. I want to just remind you, this is the Healthy Perspective Show. You can share this on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the video on YouTube, because if you like this video on YouTube, it helps me get this message out to more people. And also, we appreciate your financial support. If you haven't done so already, visit my website, stephenhorn.com. Sign up for my mailing list. That way you'll get notified when I post additional chapters to the book I'm writing online, because I'm going to post some of the chapters online to kind of, get the information out before the book is completely ready. Also, I will be doing a webinar on the endocannabinoid system for my member program come, I think, in February, and other information that you can get by subscribing to my newsletter. And if you want to get more of the kind of training that I use, join my member program. It's only $20 a month, $19.95 a month. We have regular monthly webinars, online database, and you also get discounts on our other courses, materials, and slides. So thank you for watching. I went a little overtime today, but I think that's good because, like I said, there was a lot to cover. And I hope you'll join me in a couple of weeks when I continue this topic, talking about endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids and getting a little more specifically in what they do and about other issues about using this properly. And then, like I said, I'll probably continue to talk about it for several more of these Healthy Perspective shows. So have a good day, and I'll talk to you again, hopefully in a couple of weeks. Bye.